My son's words cut through me like a knife through butter. Mom, I think you'd be more comfortable sitting with the kids tonight. At first, I thought I'd misheard him. We were standing in the gleaming marble foyer of his new mansion in Westchester County, surrounded by the kind of luxury I could only have dreamed of providing for him when I was raising him alone. The chandelier above us probably cost more than my yearly pension as a retired university professor. I'm sorry. What did you say, Michael? I asked, forcing a smile while clutching my purse, the nicest one I owned, a Coach bag I'd splurged on at the outlet mall, bought specially for this dinner. Michael shifted uncomfortably, straightening his perfectly tailored suit jacket. He glanced toward the formal dining room, where I could hear the murmur of important voices and the gentle clank of expensive crystal. He lowered his voice, as if what he was about to say was somehow for my benefit rather than his convenience. Look, Mom, these are very important people, top executives, a senator's son, people who can make or break my career. Thank you for being here. If this story touched you, please subscribe and don't forget to leave a comment. I read every one of them, and it's how I see just how far our stories are reaching. He brushed an invisible piece of lint from his sleeve. The conversation might be a bit advanced: politics, market trends, investment strategies. I just don't want you to feel out of place or uncomfortable. The air left my lungs. I was 58 years old. I had taught economics at Columbia for 23 years. I had a PhD. I had published 3 books and countless articles in peer-reviewed journals. I had raised this man on my own after his father died when Michael was only 8. And here he was, suggesting I wouldn't understand advanced conversation. See, it was all I could manage to say, my voice barely audible over the knot forming in my throat. Diane, his wife of 10 years, appeared beside him in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her smile was practiced, perfect, and didn't reach her eyes the same smile she'd given me at every family gathering since they'd married. Margaret, so glad you could make it. She air-kissed somewhere near my cheek, the scent of her expensive perfume almost overwhelming. We have a lovely little table set up in the sunroom for you and the children. My mother will be joining you too. She finds Michael's business talk so dreadfully boring. So that was it, the mothers and children tucked away where we wouldn't embarrass them. I felt heat creeping up my neck as I fought to maintain my composure, to not show how deeply this casual dismissal wounded me. I'd actually like to join the main table, I said quietly but firmly. I taught economics for over 2 decades. I'm sure I can follow along with any discussion about markets or investments. The look that passed between Michael and Diane was brief but unmistakable panic mixed with annoyance. It was the same look they exchanged whenever I said something they deemed inappropriate. At their country club events. Mom, please, Michael whispered sharply, taking my elbow and guiding me a few steps away from the entrance to the dining room. Don't make this difficult. These people are expecting a certain atmosphere just for tonight. Please do this for me. Before I could respond, Diane chirped, the kids are so excited to see their grandmother. They've been asking about you all day. Emma has a new drawing to show you, and Tyler wants to tell you all about his soccer game. I love my grandchildren, of course. Emma, 7, and Tyler, 9, but I knew emotional manipulation when I saw it. They were being used as an excuse to keep me away from the important table. From the people Michael wanted to impress. Michael leaned closer, his voice so low only I could hear him. Just do as I ask. This isn't the time to make a scene. I wanted to stand my ground, to remind him who had worked 3 jobs to put him through that Ivy League education, who had gone without new clothes and vacations so he could have everything. I wanted to remind him how I'd helped him with his college applications, edited his essays, stayed up late explaining economic principles that now formed the foundation of his successful career. But something in his eyes, a coldness I'd never seen before, made the words die in my throat. So I nodded, allowed Diane to guide me toward the sunroom, and tried to ignore the burning humiliation spreading through my chest like wildfire. Each step away from the dining room felt like another piece of my dignity being stripped away. As I passed the dining room entrance, I caught a glimpse of the impressive table set for 16 adults, with name cards and multiple wine glasses at each setting. The centerpiece was a stunning arrangement of orchids and exotic blooms. The guests were all immaculately dressed, exuding the confident air of people who had never questioned their place at the table. In the sunroom, 3 children under 10 were watching a movie on a tablet, including my grandchildren who barely looked up to acknowledge my arrival. Emma offered a quick hi, Grandma, before returning her attention to the screen. Diane's mother, Evelyn, a woman who had never hidden her disdain for her son-in-law's ordinary mother, sat scrolling through her phone in a corner armchair. Dinner will be served soon, Diane said brightly, gesturing to a small table in the corner covered with a plastic tablecloth printed with cartoon characters. The kids are having chicken fingers and fries, their favorite. We've got some for you adults too. Of course, She patted my arm condescendingly before disappearing back to the important people. I sat down heavily on a wicker chair in my carefully chosen outfit, a blue dress I'd splurged on at Nordstrom, suddenly feeling cheap and inappropriate next to Evelyn's designer ensemble. I had spent hours getting ready for this dinner, even having my hair and makeup done at the local salon. Excited to finally meet Michael's business associates, perhaps even contribute to the conversation with my expertise. Don't take it personally, Evelyn said without looking up from her phone. I've been relegated to the kiddie table for 5 years now. I taught at Columbia for over 20 years, I said, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. I have a PhD in economics. Evelyn finally looked up, surprise briefly crossing her features before she shrugged. Doesn't matter to them. We don't fit the image for the next hour. I picked a chicken finger served on a plastic plate while trying to engage my grandchildren and Evelyn in conversation. Through the half-open door, I could hear bursts of laughter and animated discussion from the dining room. The aroma of gourmet food, nothing like our chicken fingers, wafted in occasionally, a reminder of the disparity in our treatment. Grandma, can you open this ketchup packet? Emma asked. The first time she'd acknowledged me since my arrival. As I helped her, I noticed Tyler rolling his eyes. Dad says Grandma isn't good with complicated things, he said matter-of-factly. That's why she sits with us. The innocent cruelty of a child repeating what he'd heard cut deeper than any direct insult could have. I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment alone to compose myself. I took a route that passed by the dining room, telling myself I just wanted a glass of water from the kitchen. I paused just outside the door, out of sight but close, enough to hear the conversation. Your presentation to the board was brilliant, Michael, a deep voice was saying. The way you handled those projections, absolutely masterful. I've always had a knack for numbers, Michael replied, his voice confident, pleased. Got it from my father. He was quite the financial wizard before he passed. My breath caught in my throat. His father, Thomas, had been a kind man, a high school history teacher who could barely balance a checkbook. A running joke had been that I handled all our finances because numbers made his head spin. I stood frozen, listening as my son continued to fabricate a history that erased me completely. And your educational background? A woman asked. Princeton undergrad, Harvard business, wasn't it? Yes, Michael said smoothly. Family tradition, actually, another lie. I was the first in my family to attend college at all, working my way through state school before earning a scholarship for my graduate work. There was no family tradition of Ivy League education, only my endless hours of tutoring Michael, helping him prepare for standardized tests, and the 3 jobs I worked to afford the application fees for those prestigious schools. And your mother? Someone else asked. Is she joining us tonight? There was a slight pause, and I held my breath, hoping against hope that Michael would acknowledge me with pride, perhaps even invite me to join them. She's spending time with the children, Michael answered carefully. She's more comfortable there. Simple pleasures, you know. Not really one for complex conversation. Simple. The word echoed in my head like a slap. I had published 3 books on economic theory. I had spoken at international conferences. I had taught thousands of students who now held positions in major financial institutions across the globe. But to my son, I was simple. Too simple to sit at his table. I must have made a sound, a gasp, or a step backward because Michael looked up and saw me, standing there. For a split second, something like shame crossed his face before his expression hardened into one of annoyance. Mom, he said loudly, drawing the attention of the entire table. Did you need something? 16 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me, the simple woman who didn't belong. I felt myself shrinking under their gaze, my confidence evaporating like morning dew under a harsh sun. No, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Just heading to the restroom. I hurried away, locking myself in the powder room where I finally allowed the tears to come. I stared at my reflection in the ornate mirror, at the carefully applied makeup now streaking down my cheeks, at the woman who had given everything for a son who was now ashamed of her. I thought back to the countless nights I'd spent at the kitchen table, grading papers with one hand while helping Michael with his homework with the other. I remembered selling my mother's jewelry, the only thing of value I had inherited, to pay for Michael's first semester at Princeton. When the scholarship money was delayed, I remembered sitting alone at his graduation, bursting with pride even though I had to leave immediately after to work a night shift. When I returned to the sunroom, Evelyn gave me a knowing look. You've been crying, she said. Not unkindly. Allergies, I lied, not wanting to give her the satisfaction. She surprised me by shaking her head. They always forget where they came from, she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. It was the most civil thing she'd ever said to me. This moment of solidarity between 2 women deemed not good enough for the main table. The evening dragged on interminably. I checked my watch repeatedly, wondering how much longer I would have to endure this humiliation. When it was finally time to leave, Michael walked me to my car. His duty as a son performed perfunctorily. "Thanks for coming, Mom," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "The kids enjoyed seeing you." I wanted to confront him about what I'd heard, about the lies, about the humiliation. But standing there in the circular driveway of his mansion, with valets parking guests' luxury cars, I couldn't find the words. "Did I embarrass you that much?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Am I that much of a disappointment?" Michael sighed, checking his expensive watch. "Mom, not everything is about you. I have a certain image to maintain. These people expect a certain background, a certain pedigree, and I don't fit that image." It wasn't a question. "Can we not do this now? I need to get back to my guests." He leaned in for a perfunctory kiss on my cheek. "Drive safe. Text me when you get home." As I drove home to my modest townhouse, the tears I'd been holding back flowed freely. The son I had raised, the boy who once looked at me like I hung the moon, now saw me as someone to hide away, someone too embarrassing, too simple to sit at his table. I remembered Michael as a child, proudly telling his elementary school class that his mom was a professor, that she was the smartest person he knew. When had that pride turned to shame? When had my achievements become something to hide, rather than celebrate? I pulled into my driveway, sat in the darkness of my car, and made a decision. This would be the last time I allowed anyone, even my own son, to make me feel small. This would be the last time I accepted being relegated to the sidelines of my own family. I just didn't know yet how I would make sure that. Chapter 2: The Roots of Pain. Morning after Michael's dinner party, I woke with swollen eyes and a heaviness in my chest that felt like concrete had hardened around my heart. I hadn't slept well, my mind replaying every humiliating moment from the night before. The looks, the whispers, the chicken fingers on plastic plates. I went through my morning routine mechanically: coffee, toast, the newspaper I still had delivered. Despite Michael's repeated suggestions that I join the digital age, I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at the headlines without really seeing them, when my phone buzzed with a text. "Michael, hope you got home safe last night. Kids had fun seeing you. Talk soon." No apology, no acknowledgement of how he treated me, just a perfunctory follow-up that allowed him to check contacted mom off his weekly list of obligations. I set the phone down without responding and gazed around my modest townhouse. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, paid for with decades of hard work and careful saving. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with economic texts, literary classics, and the 3 books I'd authored. My diplomas hung in simple frames in my home office, evidence of a life of achievement that my son had reduced to simple. The framed photographs scattered throughout the house told another story, one that Michael seemed determined to forget. I walked over to the mantel and picked up a photo of Michael at his high school graduation. He was beaming, his arm around my shoulders, proudly pointing to his honor roll cord. Back then, he'd wanted the world to know I was his mother. When had that changed? I settled into my reading chair with a photo album I hadn't opened in years. The leather cover was worn, the pages yellow with age. Inside were the fragments of our life together. After Thomas died, the life Michael now pretended never existed. The first photo made my throat tighten. Thomas, handsome in his tweed jacket, the one he wore for every parent-teacher conference at the high school where he taught history. Beside him, a younger version of myself in a simple dress, holding a toddler Michael on my hip. We were standing in front of our first apartment, a cramped 1-bedroom, where Michael slept in a converted closet, because it was all we could afford on a teacher's salary. While I finished my graduate studies, Thomas died 6 years later, a sudden heart attack that left no time for goodbyes, no time to prepare. One minute we were planning a summer vacation to the Grand Canyon, and the next, I was a 32-year-old widow with an 8-year-old son and a mountain of medical bills. The photos that followed told the story of those difficult years. Michael's 9th birthday, celebrated in our new, even smaller apartment after I'd been forced to sell our house. The cake I'd baked myself because we couldn't afford one from the bakery. The second-hand bicycle that had been his only present that year, which I'd spent weeks restoring after finding it at a garage sale. I turned the page to find Michael's middle school graduation. I wasn't in that photo because I'd been running between jobs, teaching as an adjunct professor during the day and waiting tables at night to make ends meet. A neighbor had taken the picture and given it to me later, knowing I'd missed the ceremony. There were fewer photos from those years. I'd been too busy working, too exhausted to remember to document our lives, but the memories were vivid. The night spent at the kitchen table, grading papers while helping Michael with his homework. The weekend spent at the laundromat, where I would quiz him on vocabulary words between loads. The school supplies purchased one item at a time because I couldn't afford to buy everything at once. I paused at a photo of Michael's high school science fair. He'd won first place for a project on economic impacts of climate change, a project I'd helped him conceptualize and research during precious hours between my teaching load and my dissertation work. The pride on his face as he held his blue ribbon was mirrored in my exhausted smile. That project had sparked something in him, an interest in the intersection of economics and environmental policy that had shaped his college applications. I'd spent countless hours helping him prepare, editing his essays late into the night after my own work was done. Princeton had been a reach, we both knew it, but when the acceptance letter came, along with a partial scholarship, I'd been over the moon. Michael had been ecstatic too, until the reality of what remained to be paid set in. "We'll figure it out," I promised him, already calculating what else I could cut from our budget, what else I could sell. In the end, I'd sold my mother's jewelry, the only items of real value I owned, and taken on a fourth job, editing papers for international students to cover what the scholarship didn't. I'd gone without new clothes, dental work, or any semblance of a social life for years to ensure Michael had everything he needed. The photo of his Princeton graduation showed a confident young man in cap and gown, looking nothing like the boy from our humble beginnings. I'd sat alone at that ceremony, bursting with pride, but having to leave immediately after to make it to my night shift on time. Michael had gone to celebrate with his new friends from wealthy families who took for granted the opportunities that had come to them by birth rather than sacrifice. That was when things began to change. Subtle at first, Michael mentioning that his new friends' parents were CEOs, surgeons, politicians. The way he'd stopped inviting me to meet them. How he'd suggested I might want to update my wardrobe when I did come to visit him at school. After Princeton came Harvard Business School, then his first job at a prestigious consulting firm, each step taking him further from our shared past, closer to the person he pretended to be last night. I turned to the last pages of the album, his wedding to Diane 8 years ago. By then, I'd achieved success in my own right, full professor at Columbia, published author, respected in my field. I'd finally had the means to buy nice clothes, to get my hair done professionally, to present myself in a way that I thought would make Michael proud, to introduce me to his new family. But Diane's family had made it clear from the beginning that I wasn't their kind. Her father, a third-generation investment banker, had looked at me with the same disdain I'd seen in Michael's eyes last night. Her mother had asked patronizing questions about my little teaching job, as if molding the minds of future economists was somehow quaint. The wedding photos told the story. Me, standing slightly apart from the main family grouping, Michael, his body language angled toward his new in-laws rather than toward me. The beginning of my erasure from his narrative. I closed the album and set it aside, feeling the weight of 20 years of sacrifice pressing down on me. I had given everything so that Michael could have opportunities I never had, and in return, he had decided I wasn't good enough to sit at his table. The unfairness of it burned like acid in my throat. I walked to my office and sat at my desk, running my fingers over the spines of my published books. Economic Sustainability in Developing Markets, Global Financial Systems, A New Paradigm, Market Disruption and Innovation. Works that had been translated into multiple languages, that were required reading in graduate programs around the world. My gaze drifted to a framed letter from a former student, now the chief economist at the Federal Reserve. "Your mentorship changed the trajectory of my life," she had written. "Your insights continue to influence my thinking every day." I was not simple. I was not someone to be hidden away with the children while the important people talked. My computer screen lit up with an incoming email. A former colleague, now the chair of the economics department at NYU, was organizing a major conference on sustainable economic development. "We would be honored if you would consider being our keynote speaker," the email read. "Your work in this field remains groundbreaking." The conference was scheduled for next month at the Waldorf Astoria in Manhattan. The same hotel where Michael's company would be hosting their annual client appreciation event, an extravaganza he'd been talking about for months. He'd never thought to invite me, of course. "It's just business people, Mom," he'd said dismissively when I'd asked about it. "You'd be bored." I stared at the invitation, an idea forming in my mind. What if I accepted? What if, instead of hiding in the shadows of my son's shame, I stepped into the spotlight of my own accomplishments? What if Michael's important business clients discovered that the simple mother he was so eager to hide away was actually a respected voice in economic theory? My finger hovered over the reply button as doubt crept in. Was I being petty? Was this about revenge rather than self-respect? I closed my eyes, remembering the feeling of sitting at that children's table, of hearing my grandson repeat his father's dismissive words, of being erased from my own family story. No, this wasn't about revenge. This was about reclaiming my dignity. This was about refusing to accept the small, insignificant role my son had assigned me in his reimagined life. I opened my eyes and clicked reply. I would be honored to deliver the keynote address. I wrote, please send along the details at your earliest convenience. As I hit send, I felt something shift inside me, a straightening of my spine, a lifting of the heaviness that had settled in my chest for too long. I had allowed Michael's perception of me to overshadow my own sense of worth. I had stood in the background, quietly accepting the role of a simple, unrefined mother who didn't quite fit into his polished new world. No more. It was time to remind my son and perhaps myself of who I really was. Not just his mother, not just someone to be tucked away with the children, but Dr. Margaret Wilson, professor, author, economic theorist, a woman who had shaped minds, influenced policy, and built a career worthy of respect, a woman who deserved a seat at the table. I picked up my phone and opened my calendar, marking the date of the conference. As I did so, I noticed a text from Diane. The kids are asking when you're coming over next. Maybe Sunday for lunch, another child-appropriate event, another opportunity to be kept away from Michael's real life. I set the phone down without responding. I had for weeks to prepare for the conference, to craft a keynote speech that would demonstrate exactly how simple I wasn't, for weeks to get ready to show my son who his mother really was. Chapter 3. The decision. For 3 days after accepting the conference invitation, I wavered between exhilaration and doubt. In moments of confidence, I imagined myself delivering a brilliant keynote that would remind the world and my son of my intellectual worth. In darker moments, I pictured myself freezing on stage, confirming Michael's belief that I wasn't cut out for his sophisticated world. I hadn't responded to Diane's lunch invitation. Every time my phone buzzed with a follow-up text, I found myself tensing as if preparing for another blow. Finally, on the 4th day, she called. Margaret? Is everything okay? You haven't answered about Sunday lunch. I considered making an excuse, a doctor's appointment, plans with a friend, but something in me rebelled against the continued pretense. I'm not feeling up to it this weekend, Diane, I said simply. A pause. Is this about the other night? Michael mentioned you seemed upset when you left. Michael had noticed that was something, at least, though not enough for him to call me himself. Yes, I admitted. It is. Another pause. Longer this time. Look, Margaret, I know it might have seemed a bit awkward, but Michael was just trying to make sure everyone was comfortable. Those business dinners can be so boring and technical. The condescension in her voice made my teeth clench. I taught economics at Columbia for over 20 years, Diane. I doubt I would have found the conversation too technical. Oh, well, yes, of course. She sounded flustered. It's just what? Michael has worked so hard to build these relationships. These people have certain expectations, and I don't meet those expectations. She didn't deny it. The children really want to see you, she said instead, changing tactics. I want to see them too, I replied, surprised to find my voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. But I won't be treated like an embarrassing secret to be hidden away. Not anymore. I could almost hear her mental calculations through the phone, how to appease me. Without promising any real change, I'll talk to Michael, she finally said. Maybe we can plan a different kind of get-together soon. Just family. That would be nice, I said, though we both knew it wouldn't happen. Not in any meaningful way. After hanging up, I sat staring at my phone, half expecting Michael to call next, sent by his wife, to smooth things over with his difficult mother. But the call never came. Instead, I received an email from the conference organizer with the details of my keynote address. The conference theme was economic innovation in a changing world. My speech would open the 3-day event, setting the tone for the panels and workshops to follow. I would be speaking in the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria, the same venue where, according to the hotel's website, Michael's company would be hosting their client event on the final evening of the conference. It felt like fate, or perhaps justice. With newfound purpose, I began preparing for the conference. I pulled my most recent research from my files, reviewing the data and updating my conclusions. I drafted an outline for my speech, focusing on how traditional economic models were failing to account for the rapid technological and environmental changes reshaping global markets. It was the kind of complex, nuanced economic analysis that Michael apparently thought beyond my capabilities. As I worked, I found myself thinking about my colleague Jana, who had stood beside me through my years of raising Michael alone. She had been the one to cover my classes when Michael was sick, to listen to my fears about making ends meet, to celebrate my academic achievements when there was no one else to do so. I hadn't spoken to her in months, too busy, too caught up in my own routine. I decided to call her. Margaret. Her voice was warm with genuine pleasure. What a wonderful surprise. We chatted for a few minutes, catching up on department gossip and mutual friends, before I told her about the conference invitation. That's fantastic, she exclaimed. Your work on adaptive economic systems is more relevant than ever. The conference attendees will be lucky to hear from you. Her immediate, unquestioning confidence in me was like a balm to my wounded spirit. There's something else, I admitted. The conference is at the same hotel where my son's company is having their client event. He's been less than supportive of my career lately, Michael. But he used to be so proud of you. Things change, I said, the words coming out more bitter than I intended. He's moved up in the world, apparently. I no longer fit his image of success. I told her about the dinner party, about being seated with the children, about overhearing Michael describe me as simple. To my embarrassment, my voice cracked with emotion. Oh, Margaret, Jana said softly, I'm so sorry. After everything you sacrificed for him. I don't want pity, I said quickly. I want to do this right. The speech, I want to remind myself and him of who I really am. Then let's make sure you knock their socks off. Jana said with determination, I'm free this weekend. Why don't I come over and we can work on your presentation together, just like the old days. The old days she referred to were the weeks before major academic conferences, when we would review each other's papers, practice our presentations, and offer constructive criticism. Some of my best work had emerged from those sessions. I'd like that, I said, feeling a spark of the old academic excitement. Saturday afternoon, I'll bring the wine, you provide the economic brilliance. After hanging up, I felt more centered than I had in days. Jeanette's confidence in me had rekindled my own belief in my abilities. I wasn't just Michael's mother, relegated to the children's table. I was Dr. Margaret Wilson, and I had something valuable to contribute to the world. The weekend with Jana proved productive beyond my expectations. We spent hours refining my presentation, challenging each other's assumptions, and digging deeper into the implications of my research. By Sunday evening, I had a solid framework for a keynote that would be both accessible to a general audience and substantive enough to impress the specialists. This is powerful stuff, Margaret, Jana said as we reviewed the final outline. You're connecting economic theory to real-world challenges in a way that's going to resonate with a lot of people. Do you think so? I asked, still harboring a sliver of doubt. I know so. She refilled her wine glasses. Now, about the delivery. Have you thought about what you're going to wear? I blinked, surprised by the change of subject. I have a few nice suits. The navy one. Maybe. Jana shook her head. You need something that makes a statement. Something that says, I am not to be underestimated. I laughed. I'm not sure my closet contains anything quite that eloquent. Then we'll have to go shopping. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling. There's a new boutique downtown that specializes in professional women's clothing. Elegant but powerful. What do you say? The old me would have demurred, claiming that my existing wardrobe was perfectly adequate. But the old me had also accepted being seated at the children's table without protest. Yes, I said decisively. Let's do it. The following Saturday, Jana and I spent the day at the boutique she'd mentioned. The owner, a former corporate attorney who had left the legal world to pursue her passion for fashion, took one look at me and seemed to understand exactly what I needed. You have beautiful bone structure, she said, assessing me with a professional eye. And those cheekbones, we need to highlight them. I'm thinking jewel tones, rich, saturated colors that convey authority and confidence. For the next 3 hours, I tried on more clothing than I had in the past 5 years combined. Sleek dresses with matching jackets, elegant pantsuits, blouses in sapphire blue and emerald green that made my eyes look more vibrant than I'd realized they could. This one, Jana said, when I emerged from the dressing room in a deep burgundy dress with a subtle align silhouette. It's perfect. I turned to the mirror and barely recognized myself. The dress was simple but sophisticated, the color rich against my skin, the cut flattering without being too youthful or trendy. I stood taller in it. Somehow, I'll take it, I said, surprising myself with the lack of hesitation. And the matching jacket. By the time we left the boutique, I had spent more on clothing than I had in years. But as I looked at the garment bags carefully laid across my back seat, I felt no regret. This wasn't frivolous spending. It was an investment in myself, in the professional image I had allowed to fade into the background while focusing on everyone else's needs. That evening, after Jana had gone home, I received another text from Michael. It was the first direct contact since the dinner party. Mom, Dia mentioned you were upset about the other night. I'm sorry if you felt left out. That wasn't my intention. The kids really want to see you. Can we put this behind us? I read the message several times, noting what was missing. No acknowledgement of why I might have been upset. No recognition of how he had described me to his colleagues. No real apology, just regret that I had felt a certain way, as if my emotions were the problem rather than his actions. In the past, I would have accepted this half-hearted outreach. I would have prioritized keeping the peace, maintaining access to my grandchildren, not rocking the boat. But the woman who had spent the day shopping for a powerhouse wardrobe, who was preparing to deliver a keynote address at a major economic conference, who had finally remembered her own worth, that woman deserved better. I typed my response carefully. Michael, I wasn't upset. I was deeply hurt. You seated me with the children, away from the adult conversation. You described me as simple and not one for complex conversation to your colleagues. You erased my academic achievements and fabricated a history that excluded me entirely. This isn't something we can put behind us without addressing why it happened, and how you plan to ensure it never happens again. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then set the phone down and walked away, half expecting an immediate call. But hours passed with no response. The next morning, I checked my phone to find a single text. Let's talk about this in person. Dinner at our house on Thursday. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement, just another attempt to manage the situation and me on his terms. 3 years ago, even 1 year ago, I would have agreed. I would have gone to their house, where Michael controlled the environment and the narrative. I would have accepted whatever superficial concessions he offered in exchange for peace. But not now, not anymore. I'm preparing for a conference, I replied. I won't be available for dinner this week. When you're ready to have an honest conversation about how you've treated me, you know where to find me. As I set the phone down, I felt a strange mixture of anxiety and liberation. I had never spoken to Michael this way before, never established boundaries or demanded respect. Part of me feared I was damaging our relationship beyond repair. But another part, the part that had spent decades achieving academic excellence, the part that had raised a child alone while building a career, the part that deserved to be seen and valued, knew that this was necessary, not just for me, but for Michael too, for him to become the man I had raised him to be, rather than the image-obsessed person he was becoming. In the days that followed, I threw myself into conference preparations. I practiced my speech in front of the mirror, refining my delivery, working on making eye contact even when discussing complex economic concepts. I scheduled an appointment at an upscale salon for the day before the conference, something I hadn't done since Michael's wedding. I was reclaiming pieces of myself that I had allowed to fade away. Not for Michael, not for anyone else, but for me. The night before the conference, I laid out my new burgundy dress and matching jacket, along with a simple pearl necklace Thomas had given me before he died. I set my alarm for early morning, knowing I would need time to prepare myself mentally as well as physically. As I got into bed, my phone buzzed with a text notification. It was from Jana. You're going to be brilliant tomorrow. Remember who you are. I smiled, set the phone aside and turned off the light. Tomorrow would be a new beginning. I would stand on that stage not as Michael's embarrassing mother, but as Dr. Margaret Wilson, economic theorist and keynote speaker. And if my son happened to discover who his mother really was in the process, well, that would be a bonus. The morning of the conference arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I woke before my alarm, the weight of anticipation both nerve-wracking and exhilarating. As the early sunlight filtered through my bedroom curtains, I allowed myself a moment to simply breathe, to acknowledge the significance of the day ahead. This wasn't just about delivering a speech. It was about reclaiming my voice, my identity, my worth. My phone buzzed with a text from Jana. Today's the day. Call me when you're dressed. I want to see how the burgundy looks on video before you head out. I smiled, grateful for her friendship. Without her support over these past weeks, I might have succumbed to old habits, making peace with Michael at any cost, accepting my designated role as a simple mother who didn't belong at the grown-up table. But not today. Not ever again. I showered and blow-dried my hair, styling it with more care than usual. The salon visit yesterday had been transformative. The stylist had suggested a more modern cut that framed my face and made me look years younger. I'd also allowed her to touch up the gray in my hair, not to hide my age but to enhance my natural color. As I applied makeup, another area where Jana had insisted on updating my approach, I studied my reflection. The face looking back at me was familiar yet different, more confident, more present. I slipped into the burgundy dress, fastened the pearl necklace around my neck, and stepped into the modest heels I purchased to complete the outfit. The final touch was a pair of simple gold earrings that had been a gift from my department when I earned tenure. When I called Jana for her approval, her face on the video chat lit up with a wide smile. Margaret, you look incredible, professional, authoritative, but still warm, perfect for the keynote. You don't think it's too much? I asked, still harboring a sliver of doubt. Not at all. You look exactly like what you are, a distinguished expert in your field who deserves to be heard. Her words steadied me. I gathered my notes, tucked them into my new leather portfolio, another splurge, but a worthy one, and headed out to catch the car service Jana had insisted I book. No subway on keynote day, she declared. You arrived calm and collected, not rushed and rumpled. The drive into Manhattan gave me time to review my speech one last time. Though by now I had practically memorized it, the central thesis that traditional economic models were failing to account for the rapid technological and environmental changes reshaping global markets felt more relevant than ever. As we approached the Waldorf Astoria, my stomach tightened with nerves. The elegant facade of the historic hotel stood as a symbol of the kind of elite world Michael now inhabited, the world he thought I couldn't understand or navigate. The doorman greeted me with a respectful nod as I stepped out of the car. Welcome to the Waldorf, ma'am. The lobby was bustling with conference attendees, their name badges identifying them as economists, academics, business leaders, and policy makers from around the world. I checked in at the registration desk and received my own badge, Dr. Margaret Wilson, keynote speaker. Seeing those words printed beneath my name sent a small thrill through me. I was not just an attendee, I was the keynote speaker, chosen for my expertise and insights. A young woman from the conference organizing committee approached me. Dr. Wilson, I'm Alicia, your liaison for today. We're so honored to have you as our keynote speaker. The conference director asked me to show you to the speaker's lounge where you can prepare. Before your address, I followed her through the ornate lobby, noticing the banners announcing both the economic conference and, starting tomorrow, the annual client appreciation event for Prescott Global Investments, Michael's company. The two events would overlap for one day, with my keynote starting the economic conference today and Michael's client event concluding it tomorrow evening. The speaker's lounge was a quiet oasis away from the bustling conference registration. Comfortable seating, refreshments, and a small team of tech support staff awaited. Your presentation has been loaded onto our system, Alicia explained. Would you like to review it on the screen to make sure everything looks correct? I nodded, grateful for the opportunity to check that my slides had transferred properly. As I reviewed the presentation, a distinguished-looking man entered the lounge and approached me with an outstretched hand. Dr. Wilson, I'm Edward Mercer, conference director. It's an honor to finally meet you in person. Your work on adaptive economic systems has been instrumental in shaping this year's conference theme. I shook his hand, pleasantly surprised by his familiarity with my research. Thank you for the invitation, Dr. Mercer. I'm looking forward to the discussions these next few days. As am I, he replied. Particularly your keynote. We have a full house waiting for you, over 500 attendees, including some rather influential policymakers. My heart skipped a beat at the number. 500 people. I had lectured to large classes before, but this was different. This was a global audience of peers and industry leaders. Will you be joining us for the conference dinner this evening? Dr. Mercer asked. It's a more intimate gathering, just speakers and key sponsors, about 50 people. Yes, I'll be there, I confirmed, thinking with some irony that this intimate gathering was 3 times the size of Michael's dinner party, where I hadn't been deemed sophisticated enough to join. The main table dawdled as the time for my keynote approached. I excused myself to visit the ladies' room for a final check of my appearance, and a moment of quiet preparation. Standing before the mirror, I took several deep breaths, centering myself. You've earned this moment, I whispered to my reflection. Your voice matters, your expertise matters, you matter. When I returned to the speaker's lounge, Alicia was waiting to escort me to the stage. They're ready for you, Dr. Wilson. We walked through service corridors to reach the backstage area of the grand ballroom. Through the wings, I could see the vast room filled with attendees. The stage set with a podium and large screens to display my presentation. Dr. Mercer was at the podium introducing me to the audience, whose groundbreaking work on economic sustainability has influenced policymakers around the globe. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Dr. Margaret Wilson. The applause that followed was robust, respectful, the sound of recognition from peers who valued what I had to contribute. I squared my shoulders, lifted my chin, and walked onto the stage with measured, confident steps. As I reached the podium and gazed out at the sea of attentive faces, a strange calm settled over me. This was where I belonged, sharing ideas, challenging assumptions, contributing to important conversations. Thank you, Dr. Mercer, for that kind introduction, I began, my voice steady and clear through the microphone. And thank you all for being here today as we explore how traditional economic models are failing to account for the rapid technological and environmental changes reshaping our global markets. The words flowed naturally, my preparation paying off as I moved through my presentation with confidence. I watched the audience lean forward when I shared particularly compelling data, nod in agreement at my analysis, scribble notes when I offered new frameworks for understanding complex economic shifts. These people didn't see me as simple. They saw me as a thought leader, an expert with valuable insights to share, midway through my speech. As I was explaining a particularly complex economic concept with an accessible metaphor that drew appreciative smiles from the audience, I noticed movement at the back of the ballroom, someone entering late, trying to slip in unobtrusively. I faltered for just a moment when I recognized the face. Michael. He stood at the back of the room, his expression a mixture of shock and confusion as he took in the scene his mother, the woman he had relegated to the children's table, commanding the attention of hundreds of economic leaders. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded ballroom, and I saw something flash across his face. Recognition, shame, I couldn't be sure. But I didn't allow his presence to derail my presentation. I smoothly continued, completing my explanation and moving on to the next point. The audience remained engaged, unaware of the personal drama unfolding in that brief exchange of glances. For the remainder of my speech, I was aware of Michael's presence at the back of the room, but I didn't seek out his gaze again. This moment was mine. I had earned it through decades of hard work, research, and academic contribution. I wouldn't allow it to be diminished or distracted by our personal conflict. When I concluded my address, the applause was enthusiastic and sustained. Dr. Mercer returned to the podium to thank me, noting that my speech had set precisely the tone of intellectual rigor and practical application they had hoped would frame the conference. As I exited the stage, several attendees approached to introduce themselves and continue the discussion of points I had raised. I engaged with them readily, exchanging business cards and scheduling follow-up conversations for later in the conference. It was nearly 30 minutes before I had a moment to myself, and by then, Michael was nowhere to be seen. Had he left immediately after my speech? Or was he somewhere in the crowd of networking economists, perhaps too uncomfortable to approach me? I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned, half expecting to see my son. Instead, it was Jana. Beaming with pride. "You were magnificent," she said, giving me a quick hug. "Absolutely brilliant. The way you broke down those complex concepts." I saw people around me having aha moments throughout your talk. "Thank you for coming," I said, genuinely touched by her presence. "I wasn't expecting to see you here. Wild horses couldn't have kept me away," she replied. "Besides, I wanted to see the new Margaret in action. And I wasn't disappointed." I smiled, appreciating her support more than I could express. "I saw Michael," I admitted quietly. "He came in partway through the speech." Jeanette's eyebrows rose. "Did he know you were speaking?" "No. I didn't tell him about the conference. I think he must be here for preliminary meetings about his company's event, which starts tomorrow." "How did he look?" "Shocked," I said, remembering his expression, completely blindsided. "Good," Jeanette said with satisfaction. "Sometimes we need to be shaken out of our assumptions." Speaking of which, there's someone who wants to meet you. She was quite impressed with your keynote. Jeanette guided me through the crowd to a distinguished-looking woman in a tailored suit. "Dr. Wilson. This is Elaine Prescott, CEO of Prescott Global Investments." My breath caught. Prescott Global Investments, Michael's company. This was his boss, Dr. Wilson. Elaine Prescott extended her hand, her grip firm and confident. "That was an exceptional presentation. Your analysis of how traditional economic models are failing to adapt to technological disruption was particularly relevant to our investment strategies." "Thank you," I replied, finding my voice. "I'm glad the research resonated with you more than resonated," she said. "I'd like to discuss the possibility of having you consult with our economic forecasting team. Your perspective would be invaluable as we refine our long-term investment approaches." I blinked, momentarily speechless. Elaine Prescott, one of the most powerful women in global finance, wanted me to consult for her company, my son's company. "I would be interested in exploring that possibility," I said carefully, accepting her business card. "Excellent. I'm hosting a dinner for our executive team tomorrow evening, before our client event begins in earnest. Would you be available to join us? It would be a good opportunity to introduce you to the team and discuss how your expertise might benefit our strategies." Before I could respond, another voice entered the conversation. "She'll be there." I turned to find Michael standing beside us, his face carefully composed into a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dr. Wilson is my mother," he said to Elaine Prescott, whose eyebrows rose in surprise. "Is that so?" She looked between us. "Michael, you never mentioned your mother was a leading economic theorist." "An oversight on my part," he replied smoothly, though I could see tension in the set of his jaw. Elaine turned back to me. "Well, this is a fortunate connection. Will you join us tomorrow evening?" "Dr. Wilson." I met Michael's gaze briefly before returning my attention to Elaine. "Yes, I'd be delighted to attend." "Wonderful. Michael will share the details with you." She glanced at her watch. "If you'll excuse me, I have another meeting to attend." "It was a pleasure meeting you, Dr. Wilson." Your keynote was truly impressive. As she walked away, a heavy silence fell between Michael and me. Jana, sensing the tension, murmured something about getting refreshments and discreetly stepped away. Mom, Michael finally said, his voice low. Why didn't you tell me you were speaking at this conference? I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw confusion, embarrassment, and something else I couldn't quite identify in his expression. Would it have mattered? I asked quietly. Would you have seen me differently if you'd known? He had no immediate answer for that, and in his silence, I found mine. That's why I didn't tell you, I said. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have colleagues to speak with. I turned away, leaving my son standing alone as I rejoined the group of economists eager to continue our discussion. For the first time in our relationship, I had set the terms of our interaction, and it felt right. The executive dining room at the Waldorf Astoria exuded quiet elegance, crystal glasses, fine china, and subdued lighting that cast a flattering glow over the assembled guests. I arrived precisely on time, wearing a slate blue suit that Jana had insisted complemented the burgundy dress from yesterday. Never wear the same power outfit twice in a row, she had advised. They'll be looking at you differently tonight. Make sure you give them something new to see. As I entered the room, conversations paused momentarily. Elaine Prescott rose from her seat at the head of the table and approached me with an extended hand. Dr. Wilson, thank you for joining us. Please, let me introduce you to our executive team. I shook hands with a succession of polished professionals, each expressing admiration for my keynote address. Michael stood to the side, his smile fixed, his posture rigid. When the introductions reached him, Elaine's tone shifted subtly. And of course, you know our Director of Client Relations, Michael Wilson. She glanced between us. I'm still amazed I never made the connection before. You must be very proud of your son. Dr. Wilson, Michael has always been ambitious, I replied, carefully meeting my son's gaze, and I've always been proud of his work ethic. Not exactly the effusive maternal praise Elaine might have expected. But I wasn't going to pretend our relationship was something it wasn't, not anymore. As we took our seats for dinner, I found myself placed at Elaine's right hand, the position of honor. Michael sat 3 chairs away, his jaw tight as he watched the chief investment officer engage me in a detailed conversation about my economic forecasting methodologies. Your approach to integrating environmental impact data is particularly interesting, the CIO commented. We've been struggling to quantify those variables in our long-term models. It requires looking beyond traditional metrics, I explained, warming to the familiar topic. Market disruptions often happen at the intersection of economic and environmental pressures. As the conversation flowed around the table, I was struck by how comfortable I felt. These people leaders in global finance were treating me as a peer, an expert whose insights they valued. The contrast with my treatment at Michael's dinner party couldn't have been more stark. When the main course arrived, Elaine steered the conversation toward my potential consulting role. We'd like you to conduct a comprehensive review of our forecasting models, Dr. Wilson. Your perspective could be invaluable as we adjust our strategies for the coming decade. I'd be happy to discuss the parameters of such a project, I replied. Excellent. Perhaps you and Michael could work together on setting this up. Given your connection, I imagine the communication would be seamless. Michael nearly choked on his wine. Actually, Mom's schedule is quite busy with her academic commitments, he said quickly. It might be better if we worked through proper channels. Elaine raised an eyebrow. Proper channels? She's your mother, Michael. I would think that would simplify things, not complicate them. The tension around the table was palpable. Michael's colleagues exchanged glances, clearly sensing the undercurrent of discomfort. You think so? I said, setting down my fork. But, Michael and I don't often discuss our professional lives. In fact, until yesterday, I don't believe he'd mentioned my background to any of his colleagues. A heavy silence fell over the table. Elaine looked between us, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. Well, she said finally, that seems like a missed opportunity. Your expertise is precisely what we've been seeking to incorporate into our advisory board. Mom has been retired for some time, Michael interjected, desperation edging his voice. Her research, while impressive, isn't necessarily current with market trends. I felt the familiar sting of his dismissal. But this time, I didn't shrink from it. My keynote yesterday focused on current market trends. I pointed out quietly, the same ones that affect your clients' investments. The research was completed just last month. Michael's face flushed. I could see him calculating how to navigate this unexpected situation. His mother, whom he had dismissively called simple, being courted as a valuable consultant by his own CEO. The dessert course arrived, providing a momentary distraction. As the servers moved around the table, Elaine leaned closer to me. I sense there's something unresolved between you and your son. she said quietly. Personal matters are not my concern, but I value authenticity in my team and talent wherever I find it. Her implication was clear. Whatever Michael might have said or implied about me in the past, she was making her own assessment now, after dinner, as the group moved to a sitting area for coffee. Michael approached me with a carefully neutral expression. Could we speak privately for a moment? He asked. I nodded, following him to a quiet corner of the room. Why are you doing this? He whispered urgently. Doing what exactly, this? He gestured vaguely. Coming here. Speaking at the conference, meeting my boss, I studied my son's face, a face I had loved since the moment he was born. The face that had looked at me with shame at his dinner party. I'm not doing anything to you, Michael, I said quietly. I'm simply being who I've always been, Dr. Margaret Wilson, economist. The fact that you've chosen to hide that part of me, to be embarrassed by it, is your issue, not mine. He stared at me, speechless for a moment. You could have warned me. Like you warned me before seating me with the children? Before telling your colleagues I was simple? His eyes widened slightly. You heard that. Yes, I heard that, and I heard you attribute your success with numbers to your father, who, as we both know, could barely balance a checkbook. Michael had the grace to look ashamed, at least briefly. I was just trying to what? Fit in with people who would judge you based on your background. Who would think less of you because your mother wasn't born into privilege? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I have to get back, he finally said. We'll talk about this later. As he walked away, I felt no satisfaction, only a deep sadness. The gap between us seemed wider than ever, yet paradoxically, I felt closer to my true self than I had in years. Elaine approached as Michael rejoined the main group. Everything all right? Family dynamics are rarely simple, I replied with a small smile at my choice of words. She nodded thoughtfully. Indeed, though in my experience, the most valuable things rarely are. The final day of the conference arrived with a sense of completion. I had delivered my keynote, participated in panel discussions, and established new professional connections. My consulting agreement with Prescott Global Investments was being drafted by their legal team, a surprising outcome that still felt slightly surreal. I was packing my conference materials in the hotel lobby when a familiar voice called my name. Mom. I turned to find Michael standing there, looking more uncertain than I'd seen him in years. He was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, a far cry from the polished executive persona he'd maintained during the conference. Michael, I acknowledged, setting down my portfolio. I'm surprised to see you here. I thought you'd be busy with the client event. It doesn't start until this afternoon, he said. I was hoping we could talk, really talk. He gestured to the hotel's cafe. Do you have time for coffee? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to decline, to let him feel the sting of rejection as I had. But the wiser part, the part that remembered rocking him to sleep as a child, that had celebrated his triumphs and comforted him through disappointments, knew that healing couldn't begin with retaliation. Yes, I said simply. I have time. We sat at a quiet corner table, an awkward silence hanging between us as we waited for our drinks to arrive. Michael fidgeted with his napkin, folding and unfolding it with uncharacteristic nervousness. You were incredible, he finally said, looking up to meet my eyes. Your keynote. Everyone's been talking about it. Thank you, I replied, not making it easier for him, but not making it harder either. He took a deep breath. I owe you an apology. A real one, not the half-hearted text I sent before. He paused as our coffees arrived. Gathering his thoughts, I treated you terribly at that dinner. Party, actually. I've been treating you terribly for years. This simple admission, spoken plainly without excuses, caught me off guard. I had expected defensiveness, perhaps even anger, not this quiet acknowledgement. Why? I asked, the question that had been haunting me since that night. When did you start being ashamed of me? Michael winced at the word ashamed, but didn't deny it. It wasn't one moment, he said slowly. It was gradual. At Princeton, I met people from families with generations of wealth and privilege. I felt like an outsider, like I didn't belong. So you created a new background for yourself. I finished for him. One where your father was a financial wizard and your mother wasn't the first in her family to attend college. He nodded, unable to meet my eyes. It started as small exaggerations, then became a narrative I couldn't escape. The more successful I became, the more I felt I had to maintain this image. An image that had no room for who I really am. Yes, he admitted, and that's unforgivable. I studied my son's face, seeing both the man he had become and the boy he had been. It's not unforgivable, I said quietly, but it is deeply disappointing. Michael looked up, surprise flickering across his features. After how I treated you, you still consider forgiving me? Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, or pretending the hurt didn't happen, I explained. It means creating space for a new relationship to emerge from the ashes of the old one. I like that, he said, his voice catching slightly. I like to try to build something new, something honest. That would require you to be honest about who you are, I pointed out, and who I am. He nodded slowly. I know. I've been thinking about that a lot since seeing you on that stage. He paused, collecting himself. When I saw you speaking, watch how those people respected you, something clicked. I realized I'd been running from the very thing that made me who I am, you, and everything you sacrificed for me. The words I had longed to hear for so long hung in the air between us, not just an apology, but recognition, acknowledgement of the truth I had carried alone for too many years. Do you remember when you were 10? I asked. And you told your entire class that your mom was the smartest person in the world. A small, genuine smile tugged at his lips. Parents' Day. I brought you to school and made you explain economic theory to my classmates. You were so proud, I said softly. What happened to that boy? Michael was quiet for a long moment. He got lost somewhere along the way, he finally said, seduced by appearances and status. But I hope he's finding his way back. I hope so too. We sipped our coffee in a silence that felt, if not comfortable, at least less strained than before. Elaine offered you the consulting position, Michael said after a while. It wasn't a question. I nodded. I'm going to accept. Good, you'll be brilliant at it. He hesitated. We won't be working directly together. I'm in client relations, not economic strategy, but we'll be in the same meetings sometimes. Are you comfortable with that? I asked directly. I should be asking you that question, he replied, after how I've treated you. I wouldn't blame you for wanting distance. I'm not interested in punishment, Michael. I'm interested in growth. Yours and mine. He nodded, understanding the subtle challenge in my words. Growth would require change. Not just words, there's something else, he said, reaching into his pocket. I want you to have this. He placed a small jewelry box on the table between us. Confused, I opened it to find a pair of elegant sapphire earrings similar to ones I'd admired in a shop window when Michael was in college, earrings I couldn't afford while paying his tuition. You remembered, I murmured, touching them gently. I remember everything, he said quietly. Every sacrifice, every moment you put me first. I just lost sight of its importance, of your importance. The simple gift represented more than its monetary value. It was an acknowledgement of what I had given up, and a small step toward recognition of the debt that could never truly be repaid. Thank you, I said, closing the box. But you understand, this doesn't fix everything. I know, he said quickly. It's just a start, a token of my commitment to do better. As we finished our coffee, Michael hesitated before asking, would you consider coming to the client reception tonight as my guest? I'd like to introduce you properly this time to my colleagues and their families. I considered his invitation, weighing the sincerity I heard in his voice against the memory of past hurts. Yes, I decided. I'll come. But Michael, I met his gaze directly. I'll be coming as myself. Dr. Margaret Wilson, economist, and your mother. Not as some simplified version you find more convenient. I wouldn't want it any other way, he said. And for the first time in our conversation, I fully believed him. As we parted in the hotel lobby, Michael paused. Mom, I turned back. I'm sorry it took seeing you on that stage for me to remember who you really are, he said. Who we really are? I nodded, accepting his words for what they were. Not a complete resolution, but a beginning. That evening, as I entered the grand reception hall wearing my new sapphire earrings with a simple black dress, I saw Michael scanning the crowd for me. When our eyes met, he smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, and walked over to greet me. Mom, he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, I'd like you to meet some people. He led me to a group of his colleagues, his hand lightly touching my back in a gesture of support. Everyone, this is my mother, Dr. Margaret Wilson. She's just agreed to join our economic advisory board. She's one of the leading voices in adaptive economic theory, and I've been fortunate to learn from her my entire life. As I shook hands and engaged in conversation, I noticed something different in Michael's demeanor, a quiet pride that had been missing for too long. He wasn't performing anymore, wasn't crafting an image or hiding his origins. We had a long road ahead to rebuild what had been broken between us. Trust, once shattered, doesn't mend overnight. But as I stood beside my son, both of us finally presenting our authentic selves to the world, I felt something I hadn't expected to find at the end of this journey. Hope. Hope.